Hello. So can you
Good
guys hear
good
me?
morning, sir.
Morning, morning. Okay, so uh, we will start off from where we left last time. Let me just share my screen. So any questions on what we did last time? Okay, I'm not able to see. Okay. Any questions? Okay, so let me share my screen. So we were working on this problem last time when we met, right? So we will kind of just quickly go over the problem again because I thought we went a little fast.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir, regarding the project,
Hmm.
can we fix the deadline after the exams?
Um you want to change the deadline to after the
Yes,
exams,
sir.
obviously. Mm, okay, so let's do it the Monday after next Monday, right? So that will
Okay, sir.
be whatever the date is. Okay, we'll talk about it. Okay, so if you want more time, that's fine. Maybe in the meanwhile, I'll probably give some addition. Maybe the next project also I can get you started on. We'll see about that. Okay. Anyway, so yeah. Uh, so this was the problem statement where you were given the, uh, uh, the total precipitation, 5 inches of rainfall. The area of the watershed was given, although we didn't use that in the problem. And then the soil type in the watershed was given, 50% group B, 50% group C, and then the different land use types were mentioned, and it was mentioned that you have to assume antecedent moisture conditions too, which means normal moisture conditions, right? Not dry, not wet. Okay, and then using the table uh, that I had earlier shown in the last lecture, we were able to identify what the curve numbers for the different land use types are, right? So for the different land use types and for the different soil groups, we were able to identify the curve number 72 for this particular one for soil group B, and 81 for soil group C, and so on for all the different kinds of land use. And then from that, we were able to estimate what the weighted curve number was. Now this weighted curve number is simply weighted by the percentage of the area, right? So instead of solving for it by converting it to area and then multiplying it by area and dividing it by area, we can still keep it as the percentage itself, because anyway it's going to we're going to divide it out by the overall area. So since we're using the percentage, we'll divide it by 100, right? So basically what we are doing is we are finding out the effective curve number, doing something like this: effective curve number equal to cn1 times a1 plus cn2 times a2, and so on, divided by a1 plus a2, and so on, right? Plus cn, let's say an. Okay, instead of writing it in terms of a1, a2, a3, we are writing it in terms of the percentage of the area, right? Instead of dividing it by the sum of the areas, if you divide it as the percentage of the area, you get the same thing, right? So that's exactly what we are doing right now, right? Instead of using the actual area, we are simply using the percentage of the area and then dividing by 100, because that's the total area, total percentage area, if you look at it that way, right? So that's all that's being done here. This multiplication, this curve number multiplied by the percentage of the area, and then you sum it all up for the two different types, and then you get the weighted effective curve number as the summation of this 4038, which is a summation for soil group B, plus 4340, which is a summation for soil group C. So these two together comprise 50 plus 50%, 100% of the area. So you get 83.8 as the curve number, and then using that curve number you find out the maximum potential infiltration, which comes to, or maximum potential retention, some textbooks use that. So that gives you 1.93 inches, right? So then you're able to estimate the effective rainfall using this empirical equation: p minus 0.2 s whole square divided by p plus 0.8 s. Now remember, you have to apply the check. Before you apply this equation, you have to check that P is greater than or equal to 0.2 S, right? S is 1.93. Uh, uh, right. P is already greater than S, right? Because P is 5 inches, right? P is already 5 inches, so no, so obviously it will be greater than 0.2 S, because S itself is less than 5 inches. So therefore, the check is fairly straightforward, not a problem. So P is greater than or equal. Sorry, greater than, not greater than or equal to. I'm sorry, it should be greater than. If it's equal to, what happens? Not greater than or equal to. I'm sorry, it should be greater than. Oh, this I can't erase because it's the previous one. Okay, that's okay. So P greater than 0.2 S, you check that, and then you apply, put it into that equation. You get the effective rainfall is 3.25 inches. So any questions on this, on how to apply this approach? Okay. So now we are going to attempt to resolve this problem, making just one change. Okay, recompute the runoff from this watershed if wet conditions of antecedent moisture conditions are applicable. Okay, so now even without solving it, I want somebody to tell me what you expect the answer to be. If you go back to the previous slide, we've got an effective runoff or effective rainfall of 3.25 inches, or direct runoff of 3.25 inches, assuming normal conditions of antecedent moisture in the soil, right? So instead of having normal antecedent moisture conditions, if I had wet antecedent moisture conditions, what do you expect the runoff from this watershed to be?
Greater than 3.5.
Say that again.
Greater than 3.5.
Hey, I thought you just said less than 3.25. Which one is it? Less than or greater than? It's okay. Say it. It's either greater than or less than. Can't be equal.
Greater than.
Greater than. Okay. So how many people think it will be greater than normal conditions? Yeah, Chakradhar, you raised your hand. Oh, so the number of people who are raising their hands is who think that it will be greater than. Oh, okay, nice. I thought I would have to do the poll. Okay, so far 3 people have raised their hands. Any more? Okay, now if nobody raises their hands, then I'll just call somebody. Okay. Nikhil. Okay, he's also raised his hand. Okay. Bittu, can you unmute yourself, please?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So what do you think? Will it be greater than the previous, the 3.25 inches that we solved for, or will it be less than 3.25 inches if the soil is wet?
Less than.
It'll be less than. Okay. How many people think it'll be less than that? Okay, so there are 2 possibilities. Oops, sorry. PE for wet conditions is less than PE for normal, or PE for wet conditions will be greater than PE for normal. Okay, so now maybe Bittu, can you tell us why you think it will be the first case? You're saying answer is A. Some people are saying answer is B. Can you tell us what is your logic, or how did you arrive at option A? Whatever you thought was the reason, just tell us what it is. If the soil is wet, you're expecting less runoff to happen. Okay, now people are raising their hands, and I don't know which one they're raising it for, A or B. That's okay. Let's forget about the raising hand, because right now I've given both options. I don't know which one you're raising it for. I don't want to do the poll now. It just takes a little bit extra time to do it. what is your physical intuition? Bittu, come on, let's hear your logic for this. You've gone mute. Okay, somebody else then. Kaushal.
B. Hello,
B.
sir.
Okay, why do you think so? Just give us a reason, na? Why you've answered B? Just tell me why, or what is your intuition? Quickly, guys. Just why did you say B? I mean, you can't just say I just said something, whatever came to my mind.
I think, sir, B.
What is that? You think?
B is right.
We are not discussing which one is right now. We are trying to understand why you think B is right. If the soil is already wet and I receive the same amount of rainfall, will there be more runoff or less runoff? You are saying there'll be more. Just tell us why.
Because it's already wet, maybe there will be less infiltration.
Okay, so maybe there will be less infiltration. Now, see, you have to, whatever we have learned so far, we have to try to see if you can apply that principle to whatever this context is, right? So now, if the soil is already wet, will the time of ponding be less or more?
Less.
Time of ponding will be less, correct? If I have so just imagine this, I have a soil, I have some soil over here and soil over here. Okay, so let's say this is A and B. Everything is identical. Here I have normal soil moisture. Here I have wet soil moisture. Okay, so basically more soil moisture. I receive some amount of rainfall, P, same amount of rainfall, P. In which case will the time of ponding be greater?
Normal.
For the normal case, because the soil is not wet, it is at normal moisture conditions. Because the soil is at normal moisture conditions, it can infiltrate more. If it has, which means it has a higher infiltration capacity. If it has a higher infiltration capacity, it will take longer for that soil to reach a state where the rainfall intensity will be greater than the infiltration capacity of the soil. So if that is the case, then the time of ponding for normal will be greater than time of ponding for wet. Okay, so time of ponding for normal will be greater than time of ponding for wet. If that is the case, if ponding happens later, then there will be less runoff. Or in other words, if ponding happens sooner, there will be more runoff, right? So that is exactly what this problem is trying to, so even without solving it, qualitatively, you should have an idea of what to expect. Okay, let us say you are given this problem to solve, all right? And in your mind, you're expecting an answer greater than 3.25 inches, which is what we got for the previous problem, right? In your mind, you're expecting an answer greater than 3.25 inches. When you're doing the calculations, you make some mistake and you get an incorrect, an answer which is less than 3.25. Then that gives you an opportunity to go back and check your numbers, right? Okay, I was expecting an answer greater than 3.25. Why am I not getting it? Maybe I made some calculation mistake. You can go back and check. So these kinds of problems where there's a conceptual understanding, right? Exact same problem. We've just changed one condition, and then you should have an idea of what to expect. If only one thing changes, everything else remains the same, then you should have an idea of what to expect in terms of the answer. Okay, so in terms of how to go about solving it, there's an equation that was we provided an equation last class. There's an empirical equation that allows you to convert your curve number for a moisture condition 3 to obtain curve number for moisture condition 3, assuming you know the curve number for moisture condition 2. right? In the previous problem, we had already obtained that curve number. You put that number into this equation. I think it was 83.8, this curve number 2. You put that into your equation and then you get a number 92.3. Now already this number 92.3 is telling me that runoff will be more, right? Go back and think about what this curve number means. If curve number equal to 100, that means it's perfectly impervious. All the rainfall will become runoff, right? So you should keep in mind the relationship between S and curve number. S is 1000 divided by curve number minus 10, right? So if curve number equal to 100, S equal to 0. If S equal to 0, PE, if S equal to 0, PE equal to P, right? So the closer your curve number gets to 100, the closer PE will get to P, right? As curve number approaches 100, S approaches 0, PE approaches P. So that's the physical idea that you should have in your mind. Just by looking at the curve number, you should be able to say, you know what, if this is how curve number is changing, then this is what will happen to my S. And if this is how S is changing, then this is what will happen to my runoff. Okay. So it's a simple problem. You just get that value of curve number, put it back into that equation. You get a new value of S, right? The previous problem, S was 1 point something, 1.9 inches or whatever. Now you're getting 0.83 inches. Again, you do the check, P minus 0.2 S. Obviously, P is going to be greater than 0.2 S. Then you apply that equation, you get runoff equal to 4.13 inches, right? Which is almost more than 80% of the total rainfall, right? Total rainfall was 5 inches. More than 80% of it has become runoff. Is that okay? Any questions? Okay. So now we are going to talk about another approach for estimating runoff, but we are going to talk about it in a particular context. Okay. So now imagine, so when I say storm sewer, what is it that comes to your mind? What do you understand by the word storm sewer? What is a storm sewer? Yeah, anybody? What exactly is a storm sewer? So basically, storm sewer is a network of pipes, right? So in any urban area, right, along the roads, right? So if you have a road in an urban area, have you taken transportation engineering? You're having it right now, correct?
Next semester, sir.
Oh, next semester. You've not had a, okay. So in transportation engineering, you will learn about one aspect of roads. Whenever you have a road, typically to prevent flooding on the road, you provide some slope on the road surface. Okay, so usually it will be provided with a slope such that water that falls on the road will flow to either side of the road. Okay, so on both sides of the road, you may have a drainage system. Okay. Okay, so this is, let's say this is a road. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Okay, so we have a road, and on both sides of it, yeah, just forget it. So I have a road, and on both sides I may have a storm sewer. Okay. Now, when you want to design, now the storm sewer is not only going to take the rainfall that is falling on the road. It may also, in this area there may be some residential area. Okay. Whatever rainfall falls onto this residential area may also flow in and enter into this storm sewer, right? So it's basically, these pipes are underground, right? And they just collect the runoff generated by the storm, not only from the road, but also from the urban area, whatever it's there around that region. It collects the runoff and just flows away towards a surface water body, right? So the objective is to transport the runoff generated by the storm to a surface water body nearby. Okay, so this city may consist of a network of pipes. Every road will have these kinds of pipes. They'll all connect together. They'll form a big network, and eventually this network of pipes will transport all the rainwater, all the storm generated, all the runoff generated by the storm will be transported by these pipes to a surface water body. Right? So now the question is, if I want to design the storm sewer, what kind of information do I need to know, and what kind of design will I have to do for a storm sewer design? Right? This is the problem is the same. When I want to design the storm sewer, essentially the problem is the same as what we've been looking at so far. How much runoff is going to be generated, right? If I can somehow estimate how much runoff is going to be generated, I can design the pipe appropriately I can design the size of the pipe. If I know that I'm going to generate X amount of runoff, then I need a pipe of diameter 1 meter or 500 mm or whatever it is, right? So the size of this pipe depends on the amount of runoff that you're going to experience, right? This area is going to experience. And then, but the critical thing here is, I am not interested in designing a pipe for the for anything less than the maximum runoff that I'm expecting. If I can design a storm sewer pipe for the maximum runoff that you will expect in that given area, right? In every area, there's a certain amount of rainfall that you expect. Given that amount of rainfall, there's a certain maximum amount of runoff that you will also expect. So you have to design the pipes or the storm sewers for the maximum runoff that you expect, right? So for that, you need to know the peak runoff rate. You're not interested in anything lower than the peak. If your storm sewer system can handle the peak runoff rate, then it can handle everything other than that, everything less than that, right? So our objective is to design the storm sewer such that it can handle the peak runoff rate. Okay, so this peak runoff rate is the important parameter over here. So now for doing this, for estimating this peak runoff rate, there is this method that we typically use, which is called the rational method. Okay, the reason that it's called the rational method, I won't say that doesn't mean that this is the most rational method that's out there. Okay, but somehow, for whatever reason, the name that we use for this method is called the rational method. Okay, it is as rational as any other empirical method. Okay, there's nothing extraordinarily rational about this particular method. It is just the terminology that is used is the rational method. Okay, so in this rational method, what we do is this peak flow rate, peak runoff rate, we give it by this equation Q equal to C times I times A. Okay, CIA, Q equal to CIA. Now this A, you might be very familiar what to expect with A. A is the area of the catchment. Okay, or in this case, it might be the urban area that you're interested in looking at. I is the precipitation, we should call it rainfall intensity. Okay, does anybody have a problem? Because I kind of tend to write in this east to west, no, not east to west, some kind of diagonal direction. Somehow for me, I find it most convenient to write in that diagonal direction. I hope that's not distracting you guys. Okay, anyway, yeah, but it's most convenient for me when I'm sitting down and writing. Somehow it naturally goes in that direction. Okay, yeah, anyway, so this I is the rainfall intensity. Okay, typically this rainfall intensity you will have in millimeters per hour. Okay, but you have to convert it to appropriate units. Okay, this equation is not a dimensionally inconsistent equation. It's a dimensionally consistent equation. You have to use appropriate units if you want to get Q in appropriate units. Okay, so the C is what is called the runoff coefficient. Runoff coefficient. coefficient. Okay. So Q equal to C times I times A. Now this Q is the peak runoff rate. Okay. This is not applicable for any runoff rate. So you'll understand what the assumptions are in this approach. Let me erase this. I've got a lot of text coming up now. So this C is what is called the runoff coefficient. Okay. So now the assumptions here are that rainfall of some intensity I starts instantaneously and continues indefinitely. Okay. So the same assumption that we used when we estimated our time of ponding and so on for the green amp method and all of that, the same assumption that it starts at some point instantaneously and then it continues indefinitely. Okay, so that's one assumption into this. And then now here's the interesting thing. The rate of runoff increases until time of concentration. Okay, so now this is this new terminology that we're introducing, TC. Okay, so let me try to explain that a little bit. I'm going to draw over here. Okay, so just imagine that I have a watershed like this. Okay, and then I have a stream that is, so this is my outlet where I am measuring the runoff, let us say. Okay. Now we are assuming that this entire watershed, whatever the size of this watershed is receiving rainfall at some uniform rate I, which starts at time t equal to 0 and just continues indefinitely. Okay. So now if this entire area is receiving rainfall starting at time t equal to 0, a point that is closest to the outlet. Okay, so imagine a point over here. Oops. I'm going to mark 2 points over here. Let us say there's a point 1, which is somewhere here. And then I have another point, which is right at the edge of the watershed. Let's say that's point 2. Okay. Both points are going to generate runoff, right? So from here, some runoff will be generated. It will flow towards the stream and then it will come out here at the outlet. Okay. But this point, because it is so close to the outlet, it will start the runoff from point 1 will reach the outlet almost immediately, right? Rainfall starts within a few minutes maybe, or whatever, depending on the size of this thing, size of this catchment. Within a few seconds or minutes, a runoff from point 1 reaches the outlet. What about runoff from point 2? Right? It is the point in the catchment which is the farthest distance away from the outlet. Okay. So I've just drawn it as if point 2 is at the diagonally the most outermost location. It could also be here. It could also be here. I'm just drawing it as if it is the farthest point in the catchment. Somewhere far away from the catchment, from the outlet of the catchment, is this point 2, which is the point that is farthest away from the outlet of the catchment, right? Now, until runoff from point 2 reaches the outlet, will the runoff that's coming out of the outlet be maximum or not? Understand the question? Until the water that has runoff from point 2, until that water reaches the outlet, maximum runoff will not be achieved. Do you agree?
Yes.
Right? Initially, runoff starts from all of these points that are close to the outlet, right? After some time, some points that are even a little bit further away, they start contributing to this, to the runoff, and the outlet starts to experience the runoff coming from, some portion of the watershed. But only when the water that fell at the farthest point in the watershed, when that reaches the outlet, that is when you have the entire watershed contributing to the runoff. Correct? So the time that it takes for this farthest point in the watershed. Now, when I say farthest point, please remember, it is not the farthest in terms of distance. It has to be farthest in terms of time it takes for water to reach from there to the outlet, right? So for example, the distance from here to here may be 10 kilometers. The distance from here to some other point may be 9 kilometers. Okay. But if the distance from here to here, if the slope is steeper here, the water may flow quickly and reach this outlet. But here, if the slope is very gentle, then it may take a longer time for the water to flow and then come out and reach here. Okay. So this farthest point is not necessarily in terms of only distance. It may be in terms of the time it takes for the water to reach from that point to the outlet, which is not only a factor of distance, it is also a factor of the slope of the watershed at that point, right? You appreciate what I'm trying to say here? It's not only distance that's playing a role here, that's also the slope that's playing a role. It's a kind of soil over there. Everything plays a role. Okay. It's relatively a complicated idea, but in general, you can physically, visualize that there will be some point in the watershed which is the farthest in terms of the time it takes for the water to reach from there to the outlet. Okay, the time it takes. Somebody has a question? Chirag, your microphone is unmuted, so I'm able to hear some background noise. Okay, if you have a question, you can go ahead. Okay, all right. So basically, this time of concentration is basically, let me try to draw time on the x-axis and then this runoff as a function of time. Okay, so initially the runoff starts to increase, and then it remains flat. So this point is what I call my time of concentration, right? So until time of concentration, you don't reach peak runoff. After that, it remains steady. Why does it remain steady? Until time of concentration, this runoff rate keeps increasing. Once it reaches that, it remains steady, I'm saying. Why?
Because all the channels were merged into the single.
Yeah. So
every channel get.
Yeah. So at time t equal to t, at time t greater than or equal to tc, the entire watershed is contributing runoff that is coming out at the outlet. But the reason it remains at that peak all the time is because of this second point over here. The rainfall starts instantaneously and continues indefinitely, right? So the rainfall keeps falling at the same rate for infinite time. And so therefore, once you've reached TC, the entire watershed keeps contributing the same amount of runoff, and then you keep getting the same peak flow rate. So that is what this TC, time of concentration, is. Okay. Now the runoff coefficient typically ranges between 0 and 1. Now, as you can clearly see, if runoff coefficient is 1, that means you have perfectly impermeable surface. All the rainfall is completely getting converted into runoff, right? And if runoff coefficient is 0, then it is a perfectly pervious system where none of the rainfall is becoming runoff, right? So usually, if you look at a relatively large watershed, this runoff coefficient will be typical range of values, I would say, is somewhere from 0.2 to maybe 0.8. It's a pretty wide variation, but it completely depends on the kind of watershed that you're looking at. If it's a very, very urbanized kind of place, then you can expect runoff coefficient to be relatively high, 0.7, 0.8, and so on. But if it's a mix of a little bit of residential area, a little bit of urban area, but some forest, garden, that kind of thing, then you can expect runoff coefficient to be on the lower side also, right? So now this rational method, the reason I'm talking about it in the context of the storm sewer design is that is where it is most often used. You can use it for any watershed, right? This rational method does not assume that you can only use it for an urban area for storm sewer design, but this rational method is typically most frequently used for storm sewer design. That's why I'm talking about it in the context of storm sewer design. Okay. Don't assume that this is only applicable for urban areas. You can also use it for any kind of watershed. So the approach itself is applicable for any kind of watershed. Okay. Okay. So now, so as you can imagine, if I have a watershed in which there are different areas, okay, there may be a residential area, there may be a kind of a forested area, there may be some other kind of area. All of these different areas will have their own runoff coefficients. Then what do? I simply do I times sigma Cj Aj. I mean, this you can readily understand, right? So if I know the area of each different kind of catchment with its which has its own runoff coefficient, I can simply do a weighted summation of of the runoff coefficients of all of those different types of land use, and then multiply that by my rainfall intensity, which is assumed to be uniform over the entire watershed and continues indefinitely. That assumption still holds. Then I can obtain what the flow rate will be from a watershed of this kind. Is that okay? It's a fairly, I mean, this is similar to what we did with the curve number approach, where you have the different curve numbers for the different types of areas. You take the weighted mean to get the effective curve number. Similarly, you can have an effective runoff coefficient, right? So that's what this is doing. All right. Okay, so this is some kind of a table which gives you the different kinds of runoff coefficients for the different kinds of land use. And if you notice, so on all of these rows are giving you the different kinds of land use, right? You may have developed area, concrete, asphalt, grass area, and so on, and undeveloped area, cultivated land, pasture, forest, woodland, and so on. So all of these different kinds of land use are given. Here in the different columns, it gives you the different return periods for the different kinds of storms. Okay, now what do you understand what return period means? We've discussed this in terms of in the case of our precipitation, right? We discussed about return period, right? T equal to 1 by P, right? So how often you are expecting this kind of a rainfall event, right? So why will the runoff coefficient be a function of return period? Has anybody thought about that? Just you're looking at it now. Can anybody tell me why runoff coefficient would be a function of the return period of the storm?
High intensity rainfalls take more time.
Okay. And if you notice, the runoff coefficient is increasing as the return period increases. Right? You just look at any one of the rows, randomly you pick any one, right? 0.29 for a return period of 2 years, 0.32, 0.35, 0.39, 0.42, 0.46, 0.56. Consistently increasing as the return period increases. When the return period increases, what you are saying is that this is a storm that only comes once in 50 years or once in 100 years. So when you receive that kind of a storm, naturally you will expect more runoff to be generated, right? Because this kind of a storm typically will have very high intensity, right? So therefore you will reach time of ponding sooner. And if you reach time of ponding sooner, then obviously runoff will be more, right? So this is something that that it's kind of intuitive, that the more rare that a rainfall event is, right? So you heard about this, if you remember from December 2015, Chennai received that massive flooding. Chennai floods, you might have seen all those news items 5 years back. So at that time, I'm sorry, you must have been, 5 years back, you guys were what, in your 10th standard or whatever it is. Anyway, so at that time it was said that the Chennai floods was happening, was a once in 100 year kind of event. So that is why you had such a high high level of flooding in the city, because it was a storm that Chennai had not seen in 100 years, right? So when you have that kind of a storm event, and when of course your runoff coefficients is increasing, right? Because as time goes on, we are also increasing the kind of urban area that is lots of roads, lots of impervious surfaces are also increasing. So that makes it worse, right? So then you have increasing runoff coefficients when you increase the return period of the storm, right? Even if you assume that the urban area is not changing at all over time, but just by the virtue of the fact that when the return period increases, the rainfall intensity will increase. And if rainfall intensity increases, your time of ponding decreases. If time of ponding decreases, then you have more runoff. So that's very something that you can visualize. Okay. All right. So let us talk about this time of concentration a little bit more. So time of concentration depends on a couple of factors: the slope of the catchment and the length of travel. Okay. So these two parameters determine the time of concentration for a given watershed, right? The slope of the watershed and the length that it has to travel. So on this basis, there's lots of empirical equations. There's this very popular one, which is called the Kirpich equation, which gives you the time of concentration as a function of the maximum length of travel L and the slope of the catchment S. Right. So there's an empirical equation that's available to you. Of course, obviously, you're not expected to memorize this kind of an equation. There's some, and this equation, interestingly, this equation gives you the answer time of concentration in minutes. Okay. So if you want to use this equation, you have to use this maximum length in meters. Slope, of course, doesn't have any units. You put it into this equation, you'll get the answer in terms of minutes. Okay. So that's typically what you expect with empirical equations, right? So empirical equations, typically you're expected to put the put in the different terms in their appropriate units, so that you will get the answer also in those appropriate units. You can't just use it for you can't use any length unit in this equation and get any time scale. So it's not a right that kind of an equation, right? Okay. So so now we've found out how to estimate time of concentration given the length of travel, the L or the slope of the catchment, and given the runoff coefficient for a catchment. You can very easily estimate what the peak runoff rate from the catchment will be. Okay, so let's solve a problem. Okay, so an urban catchment has an area of 85 hectares. The slope of the catchment is 0.006 and the maximum length of travel is 950 meters. The maximum depth of rainfall with a 25-year return period is as below. So this is given. If a culvert for drainage at the outlet of this area is to be designed for a return period of 25 years, estimate the required peak flow rate by assuming runoff coefficient as 0.3. Okay. So you're given the runoff coefficient, you're given the area of the catchment, you're also given the slope and the maximum length of travel. So in this case, you can very easily apply your Kirpich equation that I just showed you earlier, and that gives you a time of concentration of 27.4 minutes. Okay. So now look at the rainfall information that's given. Right. In the first 5 minutes, you receive 17 millimeters of rainfall. Right. Then in the next 5 minutes, you receive 9 millimeters of rainfall, and so on. So if you notice, if you remember the assumptions that we showed for using the rational method, you have to assume that the rainfall of intensity I starts at time 0 instantaneously and continues indefinitely. Okay. So now, given this information, what do you do for this particular problem? Okay. Clearly, the rainfall is not of uniform intensity, and the rainfall is continuing for about 60 minutes. But it doesn't matter because your time of concentration is 27.4 minutes. It doesn't matter what the once the rainfall continues. I'm sorry, I'm getting hiccups here. Once the rainfall continues after 27.4 minutes, it doesn't matter what the. Oops, I'm so sorry.
Sir, take water and come back, sir.
No, that's okay. How much time do we have? have about 5 minutes. I'll just manage through that. Yeah, thanks. So we have the TC, the time of concentration, 27.4 minutes. What do we do for getting the rainfall intensity? Any ideas? So at 20 minutes, we've received 40 mm of rainfall. At 30 minutes, we've received 50 mm of rainfall, right? So you see this piece of information over here. So at 27.4 minutes, you can just linearly interpolate between them. How much rainfall would you have received? Right?
47.
Yeah, 47.4, right? So if you linearly interpolate between these two, at 27 point, at 27 point, I'm sorry. You're able to, oh, I lost my screen, sorry. Yeah, at 27.4 minutes, 47.4 mm of rainfall must have been received. Right? Okay. Now, what do we do with this information? The rainfall intensity is not uniform. Okay. But is there, given this information, what is the best you can do? Say something here. You know that in 27.4 minutes, you have received 47.4 mm of rainfall. Okay. So by that time, you should have reached your peak flow rate. Okay. But is there something we can do to find out what the rainfall intensity was in these first 27.4 minutes? What can you do? You don't have any other information.
Total rainfall by divided by catchment area.
Not catchment area. You just see, you need a
Given
rainfall
time.
intensity. You need the rainfall intensity. Exactly. So 47.4 mm of rainfall has been received in 27.4 minutes. So you can find out the average intensity of the rainfall, right? So 47.4 divided by 27.4 into 60 to convert it to millimeters per hour or whatever. So you get 103.8 millimeters per hour. So this is the intensity of rainfall that has been received up to T equal to TC, right? So if you have 103.8 millimeters per hour for 27.4 minutes, you will receive 47.4 mm of rainfall, right? Instead of, in reality, you have not received that, you have received something else. But given this piece of information, this is the best we can do, right? So we have the average intensity. So now you can simply apply that equation, Q equal to CIA. C is given to you, 0.3 is your runoff coefficient. The rainfall intensity, you have to convert it to this millimeters per hour. You can keep it as millimeters per hour, then you will get your answer. It will be in mixed units, right? So you convert it to meters per second, right? That's what I've done over here. I've converted it to meters per second. So divide by 1000, convert it to meters, divide by 3600, convert it from millimeters per hour to meters per second. And then I multiplied it by the area of the watershed. The area of the watershed is 85 hectares. And if you remember, a hectare is 10 power 4 meter square. So I put that in and I've obtained my the peak flow rate at 7.35 cubic meters per second. Okay. So it's a very, very simple approach. It's not at all complicated. You just directly take that runoff coefficient and simply use it along with the rainfall intensity and the area, and you obtain your peak flow rate. Okay, just one more quick problem. Yeah, so if in the same example, if the land use of the area and the corresponding runoff coefficients are as given below, calculate the equivalent runoff coefficient, right? Out of those 85 hectares, if I have 50 hectares of residential area, 10 hectares of industrial area, 17 hectares of lawns, and 8 hectares of roads, each with these runoff coefficients, then the question is to find the equivalent runoff coefficient. What do you do that? It's simple. equivalent equal to sigma CiAi divided by A. You simply take the runoff coefficient, multiply it by the area, sum it all up, divided by the total area, you get a runoff coefficient of 0.36. Okay, so that's the with this I think we have almost come to the end of runoff, understanding runoff. I'll just briefly speak about a little bit more. There are a number of empirical methods for estimating runoff, right? So for example, there's what is called Barlow's tables, Strange table, Kosla's formula. I'll leave it at that. There are n number of empirical equations that are available to estimate runoff for different kinds of situations, monthly runoff, annual runoff, daily runoff, and so on, right? So any number of empirical methods are available for runoff, similarly for time of concentration, and then there are lots of regression relationships between rainfall and runoff. You know what a regression relationship is, right? Yes or no?
No, sir.
Yeah,
No.
suppose I have rainfall on the x-axis and runoff on the y-axis. Let us say I collect data every year for 20 years or 30 years. I collect some data for runoff versus rainfall for this given watershed, and then I look at all these 20 years of data and try to fit a line through that. Okay, this line will have some equation, right? So it will be R equal to A times P plus P, something like that. So if you come up with this kind of you get a best fit line with the coefficients A and B, then given the runoff for any given the rainfall for any given year, you simply put it into the equation and you can predict how much runoff will be generated, right? But obviously these kinds of empirical approaches, this might only be applicable to certain geographic regions, right? So that's why we only used those techniques which are widely applicable. No matter which part of the world you are in, you can use the curve number method, you can use the rational method, you can use the phi index method, you can use that other one, what was that? Using the infiltration equations, time of ponding, and so on. All of those methods are relatively physically based, right? So you can use that approach wherever you are in the world, okay? But these kinds of empirical, other empirical approaches, they are only applicable to certain geographic regions. So therefore, we are not going to be, I'll not, we're not discussing that in the class. I will of course be uploading some reading material on the Google Classroom, which you can go through for all of these different empirical methods. Some of them are very useful, right? Not always you have to rely on a complicated method where you have to go do this and that and so on, right? Sometimes people have observed how runoff behaves with past data, and then you can use that to very easily and quickly get some estimate of how much runoff you might experience in the future for a given region. Okay, so with that we are done with runoff more or less. From the next class we will be talking about a new concept called hydrographs. Okay, so up to here is your portions for the midterm exam, which is going to be next week. Of course, I don't yet know which day it will be, so we'll wait until we get information on that. All right. Thank you very much, and see you guys on Thursday. All right. Okay. Goodbye. Take care. And of course, if you have questions, you can send me an email. All right. See you guys.